Well, the UK is really concerned about the Reform Party. That's right. And we'll get to that part of the story in a second. Over the past few months, we've been tracking England's inevitable collapse from wide open borders to London's hedonism. I mean, we took our kids there recently. You walk around stores, it's just like all like gay sex stuff in stores, like bookstores, right in the front. And our daughters are like, "What is that?" We're like, "What? This is a city in like a sign of collapse." This type of behavior, to censorship arrests over social media posts. Now England may cancel elections because conservatives appear likely to win. The Reform Party is well out in front. Nigel Farage's Reform Party. So cancel the elections if you don't like how people are likely to vote. Cancel them. English officials may postpone at least 7 county elections over fears that the Nigel Farage-aligned conservatives could win. This would be like Joe Biden looking at election data showing that Trump would win, so he just cancels the election. Will Kingston is the host of Fire at Will. He recently went viral for his commentary on why diversity is not our strength. I'm sure you got a lot of people pissed off about that in the UK. Turns out opening your borders to millions of people, who don't share your beliefs and culture will ultimately destroy your country. Will, great to have you here on the show. Great to see you.
G'day, guys. Lovely to be with you. As an aside, as someone who is terrible at managing their credit card, American Financing sounds fantastic. Wonderful sponsor. Fully endorse it.
Thank you. Even from the UK, endorsing an American. I appreciate that. And see, that's the kind of shared values that we have, right? Americans, Brits, of course. We don't need to go back to 1775 and rub any kind of salt in the wound, but a lot of shared experiences, a lot of shared values. And we recently decided to close our borders because our country has been overrun and largely destroyed. And now we're all about the cleanup process of trying to get millions of illegal immigrants out of our country. We're still hunting down the massive ring of child sex trafficking operation in our country, but the UK seems to be fine with it. How much time do you think the UK has left? And I'm not asking you to be hyperbolic, but I mean asking you to be serious here. Like, how much time do you think your country has left?
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by what the end would be. The Roman Empire declined over hundreds of years. But to answer your question, I guess more directly, the next election is in 2029. You have 5-year terms in the United Kingdom. And for many people here, it does feel like a make or break moment. Because if you have economic problems, and make no mistake, the UK is in a dire economic situation with low growth, with high levels of debt, all that sort of stuff, which many Western countries are facing. But another government can come in and change tax policies. They can change financial regulation policies, all that sort of stuff. Demographic change is almost impossible to reverse. Once people come into the country, particularly once they become citizens, it's very hard to change that. And what you've seen in 2 generations is enormous demographic change, which has led to a point where the United Kingdom now is really just a series of cultural and ethnic ghettos, in which many of those cultural and ethnic ghettos are governed by the norms of the countries from which those peoples have come from. And this isn't the 1950s and 1960s type of multiculturalism where you have the best Greek restaurants plus British values, which is fine. This is coming from countries like Somalia and Eritrea and Afghanistan and parts of the world who do not have compatible values with a country like the UK or the US or my home country of Australia. They don't share the same values towards women, towards minority groups, thinking about the separation between church and state. And as a result of that, we now have a point where sectarian violence is increasing on the streets, and you have a country which is culturally and socially fractured. This is a very worrying time for the United Kingdom, Clayton.
So I guess cancel elections. That's the next strategy, because you don't like how the Reform Party. So what do they dislike about Nigel Farage's Reform Party and those aligned with him? And is he fully out in front on trying to close the borders?
Yeah, so the cancelling elections thing, there's some, administrative trickery going on there. The bigger thing, I think, is the cancellation of speech. And I am so insanely jealous of your First Amendment rights, because I think really what the attempt from the governments And this, by the way, was the governments from the Conservative side, so the equivalent of the Republicans, as well as the Labor Party, the equivalent of the Democrats over the last 15 years, has been to slowly or to slowly stop what you can say in public. So, for example, there are these things called non-crime hate incidents, where you can be reported to the police if you cause offence, which is subjective, and as a result of that, that is logged on your record, even if it is not a crime. I've heard of stories of a schoolgirl, for example, who said another schoolgirl smelt like fish and had a non-crime hate incident that was recorded against her. Stupid stuff like this happens every day. There are 30 arrests each day in the United Kingdom for things that are said online. It is extraordinary the amount of policing that is happening for what is being said. And the worst part about it is the incumbent Labor government are going to be trying to clamp down particularly on what you can say about the religion of Islam. There is talk of what they're calling Islamophobia or Muslim hate speech laws, which are being tabled, which will make it harder and harder to raise legitimate questions about a religion. And as someone in the United States would know, of course you should be able to raise legitimate questions about any religion because it is a choice that someone makes.
I've been thinking a lot about the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War recently. Just been sort of knee deep in it again. One of my favorite subjects. And I think when I look at some of the grievances that the U.S. colonists had written in the Declaration of Independence, throwing off the shackles of this oppressive government, but specifically calling out things as it related to the king, that judges, the people in the judiciary were dependent on the king's will. So I see a lot of parallels to what's happening right now with these protests in England. People, they're almost having a kind of an American experience. They're saying we are sick and tired of the violence against our own citizenry. We're tired of the judiciary being in the pockets of these politicians, really not like almost like an independent judiciary at all. When these people get arrested, they're given favorable treatment in your country. These illegal immigrants. I mean, it's really horrible. Young Britons getting attacked in parks, and the judiciary is coming down on the sides of these horrible, violent criminals.
Yeah. There was an awful example the other day where, when I say the other day, 6 odd months ago, where someone burnt a Quran in front of a mosque. Now, I'm not endorsing burning a Quran. I think you should have the right to do it legally. But a Muslim man came out with a knife and then attempted to stab this man who was burning the Quran. And basically what we saw was, and thankfully this was overturned on appeal, but the man who burnt the Quran was both in more danger and was treated more harshly by the media and had to go through more legal problems than the man who actually attempted physical violence against that person. Physical violence is now treated almost as being a more serious threat than words in this country. It is absolutely extraordinary. And unfortunately, we don't have those old defenders of free speech, or as many as we should, to be able to say, look, even if someone says something that's hateful or bigoted, it is still on balance better to have that out in public, to have that debate, because otherwise you do have authoritarian governments who tell you what you can and cannot say. And as we both know, over the last 10 years in the US and the UK, that's been this woke progressive orthodoxy. And thankfully for you guys, Donald Trump has done a lot to address that, but there hasn't been that revolutionary figure in the UK to have that same style of redress.
I was going to ask you, who can you guys rally around? Is there anybody right now that you can rally around to say we want freedom, we want our liberty, we don't want you just coming into our houses because of a social media post, we don't want you siding with illegal immigrants, we don't want you keeping the borders wide open? It sounds like you guys are at a revolutionary moment right now.
Yeah, reform is obviously the closest to what you would want, and that's why they're well out in the polls, which is an extraordinary thing. Imagine in the US if a party that wasn't the Republicans or the Democrats suddenly jumped out to a 10-point lead in the polls. It's amazing to see what they've done. And Farage is at the moment the most likely to win. But here's the problem that they're going to face, and it's a really interesting parallel for all of our American viewers and listeners. The challenge is it could very well be Trump term 1 as in you have all the ideas there, you have the policies there, but the blob, the administrative state, which is so ideologically captured, will push back and push back and push back. And as a result of that, not much gets done. And the fear that I have is that we don't have a Stephen Miller type character who's spent 4 or 5 years drafting, thinking deeply about how you deconstruct that state. And I know people who have worked across both Whitehall, so the blob in the UK, as well as in DC, and they will tell you that the blob in the UK is 10 times worse than the administrative state in Washington. So the problem that someone like Farage will have if he wins in 29 is, even if he says we're going to shut the borders, even if he says we're going to go to net negative migration, which means more people leaving than coming, even if he says we're going to return to British values, you're going to have everyone from the educational institutions to the administrative parts of government to the media, everyone pushing against that. So we need our Stephen Miller. We need our person who understands how that works and can actually drive change. My fear is at the moment, we don't have that.
I mean, I can't wrap my head around, because if the United States had continued down this path for another 4 years, we wouldn't have a country. And you've got another 4 years to wait for this general election. What do you think is going to happen in the meantime? Because there's no move at all. I mean, the borders are, Keir Starmer has paid lip service to it, but has there been any movement at all to try to close the borders and stop this flood of migration into your country?
So token measures, basically, but the amount of people coming in per day dwarfs the amount that are being deported. But I will say as well that it is the illegal migration problem is far less significant than legal migration, in that for the last 15 to 20 years, you've had people coming from places like Pakistan, like Africa, parts of the Middle East, that don't share the same values. Cheap, low-skilled labour. Again, the closest equivalent would be, cheap, low-skilled labour coming in from Mexico into the US. That has contributed to the problems that the UK have had. Now, look, I say this as an immigrant to the UK. If you haven't noticed the very rough Australian accent, I'm initially from Australia. But guess what? Australia, the UK, the US, we share Western liberal values. And that's the type of good immigration that we should all be after. The problem is that the UK has let in millions of people who don't share their values, who despise their history, and as a result of that are threats. And let's just cover off the elephant in the room. The big change has been the massive influx of immigration from Islamic countries over the last 15 or 20 years. That doesn't mean that every Islamic person is a bad person or is violent or dangerous or whatever. But what it does mean is that at scale, Islamic culture is not compatible with Western liberal democracy. And that's a fact. Out of the 50-odd Islamic countries in the world, I think 47 of them aren't democracies. I think the 3 that actually are pretty dodgy democracies. And 40 of them are authoritarian hellholes. And the problem is we are getting to a point in the UK where, at least in certain parts of the country, you are getting enough scale to win local elections. You're getting enough scale to start influencing the politics, which is why you are now having debates in the UK Parliament about things like first cousin marriage, about things like Sharia law, about things that are completely anathema to how we would think about how a Western liberal democracy should operate. And so really this, you're right to mention the illegal immigration problem, but it is legal immigration from countries that don't share our values that will define the future of this country.
No, that's powerful. And thank you for that. I mean, entire neighborhoods being completely altered, mosques, call to prayer early in the morning. We see this in Dearborn, Michigan as well. Almost every sign is now, it's not in English anymore. You have city councils, you have local elections now with Islamic politicians who are winning these local elections, and this is how it starts. Yeah, that's right. And remind me, it's not Dearborn, which is the one where there's the Somali guy who is now a favourite to be the mayor. New York City?
No, that's Mamdani, and that's a whole separate kettle of fish. But the issue is that these sorts of sectarian communities arise really quickly. And very quickly, you don't have that binding thread that brings everyone together to say we are one country. And the really interesting example that's come out recently is a campaign called the Raise the Flag campaign. Now, American viewers are going to find this bizarre. I lived in New York for 3 years. I'm aware of how Americans are patriotic and take pride in their flag. The UK have been worried about a lot of the things that I've mentioned to you, mass migration and a change in the culture. And so you've seen, mainly in working class areas, flags, it's a good example, flags being put up on lampposts, on bridges, everywhere across the country. Now, Americans would go, you beauty, fantastic. This is a great demonstration of patriotism. The Brits traditionally aren't like that. They are a bit more reserved and a bit more quiet, which shows the level of passion from so many people. But now there's this culture war where you've got lefties that are going across the country and ripping down flags because they're saying that the Union Jack or the Cross of St. George are signs of violence and aggression towards minority groups. They're saying that they're oppressive. They're saying in some cases they're fascist. Now, if you can't rally around your country's flag, what can you rally around? It is like some people saying the Pledge of Allegiance is threatening to new minority groups in the US. This is the level of cultural fracture in the UK right now. And it shows why the multicultural project, which the UK has embraced, Australia has embraced, to an extent the US has embraced, but I think the US has a stronger identity, so it can actually make it work a bit better. But it shows why the multicultural project has utterly failed.
Oh, well said. Absolutely. It's been a failure, and it's one step away from collapse as a result. Will, thank you so much for staying up late with us there in the UK. We really appreciate it. I loved your perspective. I love your stance on diversity, and I wanted to have you on the show. So thank you so much. And where can people find more of your work?
Thank you, guys. Yeah, host of the Saturday 5 on GB News, which is the equivalent of Fox's The Five. If you can't access that, my podcast is Fire at Will. Access it on YouTube, and also just search Will Kingston on X. But an absolute pleasure to be with you guys, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you, Will. Great to see you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.